So, we're still in week one of Star Trek Discovery. Still waiting for the next episode, obviously. We've seen The Vulcan Hello and Battle of the Binary Stars. And now we've also seen the first tie-in novel to Star Trek Discovery called Desperate Hours. It's written by David Mack. And it's part of this new initiative. If you've been following the Engage, the Star Trek official, or the official Star Trek podcast, you've heard about this. They're really trying to make a big tie-in media push with Discovery, with books and comics that are better tied into the canon of the show. So they have people coordinating with the writers of the comic books and the books to make sure everything fits together, and it allows the show to offload some of the background stuff onto the books, and it still all be canon, or as canon as possible. If I recall correctly, they mentioned they wanted to be as basically canon unless they get a really good idea that might break the books, but the books and the comics, but they'll try to avoid it as much as they can. So anyway, the first of these novels came out Tuesday, September 26th, and it's called Desperate Hours, as mentioned, by David Mack. So this book is basically further background on Georgiou, Saru, and Burnham, and their time on the Shenzhou. So it's set in 2255, which is 1 year after the original Star Trek pilot, The Cage, and 1 year before The Vulcan Hello. So in it, the setup is that her old XO, Georgiou's old XO, and second officer have been pulled off the Shenzhou to take over another ship as captain and XO. So she now is sitting. She has to find a new first officer, and it's basically, for her, it's between Saru and Burnham. And Saru has seniority. He was already on the Shenzhou and a lieutenant when Burnham joined the crew 6 years earlier. But an admiral steps in and tells her, like, make Burnham acting XO for now. And so there's of course some tension between Saru and Burnham and Georgiou about this whole arrangement. Georgiou probably seems to want Burnham to be the XO at this point, but they're a bit of a it's a touchy subject for the three of them, because Saru feels that Burnham is being promoted over her, though he has seniority. He should be first officer, really, just by seniority. But obviously someone in the Admiralty feels that Burnham would do a better job than he would. So, and as this happens, there's a emergency call comes in from a nearby colony that they were doing some offshore drilling, and basically their mining rig hits something, and it sinks the mining rig and starts posing a threat to the colony. So there's this weird ancient ship that has been buried under the seabed that comes up and does make some trouble. So the Shenzhou is called to the planet to resolve the crisis, basically. So the cool thing about this book is really that it gives us a lot more backstory for Burnham and Saru and Georgiou. And the other cool thing about this is, because the whole idea for the book came from Brian Fuller, that he wanted a book where we could explore the relationship between Michael Burnham and Spock. So what happens is that the Enterprise also arrives at the planet to help with the crisis, but their mission goals don't necessarily align with Georgiou's mission goals, which is saving the colony. And let's just leave it at that. So what happens now that is you have suddenly these two crews working together, and Spock and Burnham they form an away team to try and solve the crisis. So they get spend a lot of time together on this mission. So they get to talk through a lot of their childhood drama. and we get a lot more backstory about how exactly the timeline happens when how Burnham becomes a part of Spock's family. So on the show, it's not exactly clear. It makes it looks like there was one attack at this Vulcan learning center or something that leaves Burnham heavily wounded, and Sarek saves her with this mind melt. Whereas actually at that point she's already Sarek's ward at the time. That happened, and it happened shortly after another attack on the science outpost that Burnham is staying at with her family, or with her parents. So she actually has these two Klingon attacks to deal with in her past, and it's why she's so traumatized by the Klingons. So, and I don't want to spoil anything more about what Spock's and Burnham's relationship turns out. Like, go read the book because it's really good. Yeah, it was very enjoyable to get more of the background of why, and David Mack does a very good job of kind of illuminating it, but also at the same time still making it plausible why Spock would never mention Michael Burnham. So that's basically all I want to talk about the plot of the book, because it was a fun good read, and it's not that expensive. And since these books are actually canon, so if you're really into the background story of Star Trek and you want to learn more about the show, and if there are a couple of weird kinks in the design of the new show that bother you, the book actually does a couple of interesting little twists to address this. So these are kind of the bonus facts about the book that you learn, or about Discovery that you learn when you read the book. So these are cute enough, and I know not everyone wants to read the books, but a lot of people are annoyed by a couple of these things. So we have some justifications for a couple of little wrinkles in the visual design of the show. So I'll just list these off real quick. So part one is the uniforms that a lot of people were complaining about. That, why do they look like that? Shouldn't they look more like the Cage if it's the same time? So David Mack basically pulls a rabbit out of the hat and says, like, no. It's because the Constitution class starships in this era, at this point in time, they're top of the line. They're the newest of the newest thing that Starfleet has, the absolute best. And so they're part of this new program, basically, and they have unique uniforms. So the Cage era uniforms are exclusive to Constitution class starships. Whereas the Discovery style uniforms we see on the Shenzhou and Discovery and everywhere else on Star Trek Discovery are actually an older style, which is why they look closer to the Star Trek Enterprise outfits, with the blue as the main color and the colored accents rather than being the solid color. So the other thing that people were wondering about, this Ensign Daft Punk, as a lot of people have been calling her, she actually gets a name in the book. She's called Narwani. And she's described as being the junior tactical officer of the Shenzhou. So she works in conjunction with the tactical officer to basically target acquisition and plan phaser firing patterns and all these things. And she uses she's a human, but she's wearing a VR helmet and these weird tendrils that come out of her gloves. For augmented interfacing with the ship, basically, so she can do much quicker target acquisition and have a better sense of what's where and where shots coming from, where any bogeys flying around, or things like that. So the second one that I was wondering about already in the trailer was the Disco Bolian. His name is Lieutenant Troke, and he's actually a Tulian. So they're a cousin species to the Bolians, according to the book, and they have a knack they basically embrace cybernetic technology much more than a lot of other species in the Federation do. So another thing that people were wondering about was the transporter room. You have these big dishes in the background, rather than the top emitters. It's already mentioned a little bit in Battle of the Binary Stars when Burnham beams aboard, and immediately she's like, "What is this old style lateral vector transport junk? We've discarded that long time ago on Vulcan because it takes up so much energy." So in the book, it's specifically mentioned as something that like Starfleet vessels started dropping, like newer Starfleet vessels from 2253 onwards are dropping. Lieutenant Savrou has a little musing about that in a very cute way. And yeah, basically probably because the the Enterprise and the Constitution class ships are so new and going to be in service so much longer, they probably went like, okay, let's replace these old transporters on these ships right away and get the new tag in. So, and the other thing people were wondering about has been the holographic transmissions and all this basically Star Wars style or holograms talking to each other. And it's mentioned in the book that this is a real data hog. Basically, it takes takes up a lot more bandwidth than other styles of technology, and it also because it takes up so much bandwidth, it makes it easier when you listen in on those holographic transmissions. It gives you a lot of data to try and break encryptions. So that's probably why they were phased out, because they take up a lot of bandwidth and they're a security risk. They figured out that later at some point, and so they got rid of it. See, technology works in different ways. And you can always, I mean, that's a fun thing about a fictional universe. You can always find a fun justification for why something is the way it is. If you have a little imagination, you can always kind of make a little headcanon, and now it's actually official canon. So that's why the holographic transmissions are no more when we get to TOS. That's why they're not. Anyway, just gonna wrap up here now and say, like, I really enjoyed the book. It's great. I'm looking forward to the comic books that are coming out the first issue's out in October. I can't remember the title right now off the top of my head, but it's about the Klingons, and I think the next novel comes out in January or something. But I'm definitely gonna be reading the rest of or more of the series, unless Discovery turns me totally off in the next couple of episodes, and I'm gonna drop it. But I get the feeling I will like it. Okay, take care, guys, and yeah, let's look forward to episode 3 on Sunday or Monday, depending where you are. Context is for kings.